hard bid proposals that the city received, and you can see that there are, no, that's fine, 11 actual tangible bid proposals that the city received in the RFP process. They're in descending order. You'll notice right off the bat that EIP is at the top of that with a purchase price of $11,042,884. And in fact, the next highest bid is actually more than $500,000 less than that bid. One other thing that I'd like to draw your attention to, this purchase price does not include sort of an additional aside which was negotiated with EIP in the bidding process. They have agreed to pay for reasonable attorney's fees and also costs associated with title work for the properties. So that is in addition to this number that you see before you.
Okay, so on the next page, you're going to see uses for proceeds. Again, the first item on here is the miscellaneous revenue that was budgeted in the 2017 general fund budget. That number represents $6 million. On the following page, we actually have what you guys received during budget time. It's like the general fund revenue chart. Miscellaneous revenues is on the bottom. So the budgeted amount for miscellaneous revenues was $13.9 million, but included $6 million of cell tower revenue. So this is not new. This is something that was in our budget. The second thing that's very important is we're actually going to increase cash reserves by more than $5 million. At the bottom of that page, I show the cash balance in the general fund. On January 1st of 2017, we had only about $5.4 million in cash reserves. On January 1st of 2018, again, we're going to nearly double the amount of cash reserves in the general fund. And yes, that's very important. It helps us with our bond rating, and it's there in case, it starts to rain, and again, we would have another recession. Based on where we are today, we could not weather another recession like we had in 2009. The third item on the chart is the GFOA recommended amount. That's 60 days of cash on hand. We are not at the 60-day mark, but again, this additional 5 puts us a lot closer. And that is one thing that I think the mayor has focused on since he's been in office. It is how can we improve our financial position? How do we grow cash reserves? This is a great first step to doing that. The second page, again, I'm sorry, we looked at, it's the general fund revenues. This document was in our budget report. The only new thing is the projected for 2017.
So again, if we flip to the next page, really, so the question becomes, so what is this transaction? In its most simple terms, I think I would describe it as a sale of leases. A little more specifically, if you look at the slide, it's the city agreeing to sell its interest in 15 cellular antenna agreements for the sum of $11,042,884. The transaction will assign rights to EIP to collect and receive the lease payments. In addition, there will be additional future rights associated with these particular sites, and also rights of access to the sites, both for EIP and or any tenants that may need to maintain their equipment, change their equipment, things like that. So that's really what the transaction itself boils down to in very simple terms.
So in closing, I just want to sum up on a few things, and then we'll be happy to take questions. I think it's important to try and answer the why now and why is this good for the city. I'm going to take our position on a few of those, but again, happy to answer questions. The first is a more of a global answer, which is technology is changing, and especially in telecommunications and antenna technology. This council already in the last 2 years has dealt with that. We have upgraded our ordinances to adjust. But it is only going to continue to change as 5G technology begins to deploy within cities. That's a whole parallel track that, rest assured, we are on in a very big way, both at the state level and locally, on how do we make sure that we are ready for that and are protective of citizen and public rights as that technology is developed. What this transaction essentially does is take the current technology, the risk, and shift it to EIP. We are no longer the middle person. All right, so I think it's important, and Brian talked about this. This is not a sale of city-owned land. This is not a sale of city-owned property. This property already belongs to the telecommunication. The property meaning the towers themselves, the antennas themselves. What we own is the lease, their ability to put that up there. On any given day, on any given year, telecommunication companies can merge, wiping out an entire revenue stream. They can change their technology. We are not a telecommunications company. We are a city. And so what we look at is how can we best maximize, again, going back to the Blue Ribbon Task Force, maximize the return for the citizens. And we have done that, we believe, by going through a very thoughtful public process, engaging with outside national experts, and now the risk in terms of how that technology industry changes is going to be on EIP. We are getting our value up front. The second thing I want to touch on is what Diane has already put an exclamation point behind, which is the Blue Ribbon Task Force, when it talked about financial condition, the cash reserves was a very, very serious concern. And I can tell you, anytime we go to the rating agencies, it is top on their list. You see the chart, it's very plain and simple where we should be versus where we are. Diane's talked about why, from a rating agency perspective, that's important. Every 0.5% that goes up on our borrowing costs real dollars to the citizens and to the city. And it's not insignificant amounts. We've been able to stabilize, in sole part really to Diane's leadership and the leadership of the department, stabilize our rating. We need a strategy to start to push it up again. And this is something that is going to get us on that path. The second thing I want to note is that while issue 4, with all of your help and support and the support of the citizens of Akron, shored up very significant pieces of our city services, we still have challenges on the operating side of the city that we have to work on together. We are not out of the woods by any stretch of the imagination. To Diane's point and the point of the Blue Ribbon Task Force, there's an overall financial picture that the city puts out that needs to improve. This does that because, make no mistake, the only thing we know for certain is that recessions come in cycles. We weathered the last one, but as Diane said, our current position will not withstand another one. And so that could be next year, it could be 20 years from now, but we need a strategy to prepare for it and to prepare for emergencies. That's been the main charge that the mayor has given to us in looking at opportunities like this. It's what's led us to today. And by doubling the cash reserves in one foul swoop with one transaction without impacting citizens at all. This is not a fee increase. There's not going to be a disruption in service in terms of walking around with these things. We were able to double the cash reserves. That's, as I said, a good day for Akron and a good day for the citizens when we can improve the financial condition of the city without having to raise fees or raise taxes. So with that, happy to answer questions.
Ms. Miller-Dawson, I was wanting to ask, it'd probably be directed towards you. Compare the amount that we're going to receive from EIP, compare that to the current, considering time value of money, whatnot, compare that to the value of future payments.
Okay, so the present value of future payments is about $3.2 million.
Okay. And on this, we're being offered, again,
11, just a little over 11. But again, those leases are only guaranteed to last through 2028 on the long end.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
I saw a hand, Ms. Amobian.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. and I do have to leave about 1:15, so I want to make sure that I get a couple questions in. I'm glad you, Mr. Hardy, was talking about this, because I'm trying to understand what exactly we own. You said the cellular towers are owned by the private businesses.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so there really, again, it breaks down to the three categories of leases. We have ground leases,
Right.
the rooftops, and the water towers.
Okay.
So, for example, to James's point, the ground leases, the city owns the real estate, the underlying real estate. What they have done is they've leased that land out to a provider. That provider has constructed their own tower on that land. So it would be a lattice or a monopole that's out there.
So the 3.6 mil is what we get for leasing the land to those private providers?
No, our annual amount is about 480,000.
Oh, 480,000.
Yes. So we're taking a big lump sum payment up front.
The $3.2 million is the net present value of the current leases. So that's in today's money if they were to run out. Sorry. So the 3.2 is the net present value of the current leases. So on today's money, that's what we would get through the lifetime of the leases as they stand today.
Okay.
But again, to Diane's point, I think this is important when you get back to risk. There's no guarantee that those get renewed as technology changes. That revenue stream could dry up as soon as those contracts are done. All that risk shifts to EIP.
Yeah. The other question, Mr. Chair, if you allow me, please.
Yes.
The RFPs that came in, and the one that you settled on, I don't know anything about this company, but could someone provide us something about the history of this company? How many of these have they done? How diverse the groups are that they work with? And if we were to award them this, are we talking about diversifying the group? Because, I know we engage in a lot of business, but one of the things I hear repeatedly is that when it gets to large projects, something like this, that minorities, women and African Americans and other minority groups are usually not included. So if we can get more information about this particular group so that we'll have more about what their track record is like.
I'd like to invite, we have some representatives from EIP here. If you wouldn't mind coming forward, just because we have to get you on the record, we'll get you a microphone right over here.
Yeah, if you would, please, for the record, just state your name and...
Thanks for having us. Matthew Newton, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, with Everest Infrastructure Partners.
Okay.
So John and I are the founders of Everest. Mike, our third founder, is unable to be here today. The company is a 2-year-old business. The three of us worked together for the previous 10 years in a prior company called TriStar. So the group is currently 12 employees. We are specialists in managing infrastructure assets, real estate interests, exclusively in the telecommunications leasing business, the wireless industry, as well as the power generation business, specifically solar and wind generation facilities. We own primarily real estate rights that we lease on a triple net basis to those owners of assets like the owners that have constructed cell towers on top of the city property in this transaction. The prior business we sold the company in 2014. At the time, we had nearly 1,000 assets, individual sites, comparable to the 13 that we're acquiring in this transaction. Our current business has approximately 75 sites, so this is a large transaction, but it's still a small minority of the total. Of the 75, we will have acquired the vast majority this year, more than 50 this year, so the business is growing fast. We own assets all over the country, in Arizona and California, Florida, New York, Ohio, Pennsylvania come to mind. We are, one final point, we are supported, our investor group is the MassMutual Life Insurance Company. We have a $100 million financial commitment from MassMutual that we acquired in 2015. We are at the early stages of investing that on their behalf, so we should be doing this for the foreseeable future.
Thank you.
You didn't quite answer my question, but you want to carry on. I'm interested in the diversification of your staffing, the employees, the people that, I realize this company is only 2 years old, but it sounds like you've been in business before this.
Certainly, yes. So the current business has 12 employees. I believe it's 3 women, 8 men, several. I mean, the age disparity is pretty broad. There are some in their 30s, some in their 60s.
Are there any blacks, Hispanics?
I do not believe we currently have any.
Okay. And your plan toward the future, I realize this company is very young, but
So we just hired our 12th employee, a woman. Previous to that, the 11 employees that we hired, 10 of us had worked together in the previous business, and we all started at the same time. So yes, the plan is absolutely to grow and hire and, diversify the employee base.
let me ask you this, and I don't know how this business works, but do you do mergers when you want to bring in what you don't have? Because it clearly appears that there are no minorities other than women, and I'm just wondering, if we're going to do business with you, and this concerns me greatly, I'm just going to be honest with you, that I would like for us to see companies this large or that's going to acquire this kind of revenue to have more diversity on your staff, or with some kind of plan of what we were going to do to get that. This may be a new business, but I know there are a lot of black folks that are into telecommunications. They know more about this stuff, many of them, than I do. So I'm just curious, has that thought crossed your mind?
From the beginning, it's absolutely a goal of ours, to diversify the business as we grow. We'd have ample opportunity to do that through hiring as opposed to mergers. We're located in a great place in Pittsburgh, right in the center of the city. Workforce development, in fact, is the biggest initiative in the facility where we're located. So I think we would seek to hire those people.
Could we have all the information you shared with us a few minutes ago in writing, please? I would imagine you have a portfolio of some kind that you could share with us. And my last question, Mr. Chair, is simply, how soon are we planning to do this, or how soon would we like to do this?
Sorry, Councilwoman. We have been working towards a financial closing date of this calendar year, and so we've been working again for the better part of the entire year to get to this point.
December 31st?
Correct.
Oh.
We are ready. This is the last important piece of the work to be done is council approval. But as Diane said, we had always budgeted for revenue from this transaction in the miscellaneous revenue for the 2017 budget. That was budgeted, and that needs to come in. And then, so we've been working always towards a 2017 calendar year closing date, and we're ready.
Thank you very much.
Ms. Sims?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just on the current leases, the $480,000 up front and the remaining on the net present for the current lease, how many years is left on the current, or is that over?
So the roughly $450,000 a year that we get in annual revenue is paid monthly. There are 15 leases on 13 sites. Each lease is different, and it was originated on different dates, and so some end as early as 2023, and some go out to 2028, but they're all individual. So when we say net present value, and net present value is in today's dollars. If we got all of those, if we let the leases as they are today run out, what in today's dollar value, when you discount for inflation and all the other considerations that go into constructing a net present value, what is that bottom line number? And it's $3.2 million, which we have obviously done incredibly well with regards to looking at that. So as those leases are constructed today, we are getting way more than our maximum benefit for the citizens of Akron as they're constructed today. And again, there's no guarantee as those leases run out, that any of those telecommunication companies want to keep doing it that way and keep paying monthly.
Okay. So I think I understand. Did we say that of the 15 leases that we will lease out in 5 and 10 year intervals? Or was that?
For the 50-year and what the asset is again.
So getting back into sort of the structure of the transaction, what's happening here would be, what the proposed transaction is this. We are bundling up the 15 leases and transferring them to EIP. They now have the right to collect those monthly revenues for the duration of the terms of those agreements. In addition to that, they're also getting an exclusive right to market those particular sites to other wireless carriers and things like that for a period of 50 years. So they get a lease of 50 years. So that is the transaction. So it's bundling the current leases through their end date plus the additional rights going forward.
And that's for, I want to make sure I'm hearing correctly. That's for 50 years?
Correct.
Correct.
So just, sorry, I'm not really quick at the bit. So if we were doing the current leases the way they are, and they went out 50 years, what would that?
You can't speculate that way because the way that the leases are constructed, they end, the very latest one ends in 2028. So we, the city, would then have to sit down with that communications carrier and renegotiate a new lease. So there's no guarantee beyond what we have in front of us that there would be any leases at all. And that goes back to the risk part of like, why are we doing this and why now? We know what we know, which is we have leases on the books that run anywhere from 2023 to 2028. They have a particular revenue stream. When discounted for net present value, you come to 3.2. Beyond that, it's impossible to speculate because we're talking 10 years. 10 years ago, this looked totally different. And so that's the risk that currently the city holds, that we would transferring to EIP, and lots of cities are doing that and saying, look, we're not necessarily interested in making this a lucrative business from the standpoint of leasing cell towers and things on all of our city-owned property, at least not without some real thought. So let's maximize the value for citizens now, recognizing that technology, the pace of change in technology, especially in cellular technology, is incredibly quick. So you can't actually create a dollar amount if these leases went out 50 years, because we know for certain they would be radically different if we went, even if they wanted to renegotiate them after it was done. They could go away completely. Does that make, am I explaining it?
A little bit. You mentioned earlier that this was, we've been doing this for about a year, public meetings. I just wasn't aware. I'd probably be a little more familiar with some of the things we're talking about here.
Sure. So we didn't have public meetings. I just want to correct that. We had a public RFP process. We posted on our website for months. The public RFP, it was marketed across the country. We went through, like I said, a very market-driven process that was recommended by outside counsel who's an expert in this. In fact, I think they've done cities as large as Detroit, where they've taken them through this process. So the difficulty is just mathematically you can't calculate what you don't know to be true, and so it's impossible beyond 2028 to know that.
Finally, last one. When you look at all of the RFPs you receive, what's the average age of each one of the companies? Do you know?
You know, I don't know. I can tell you that the list you have in front of you from the 11 bids, I have it under good authority from our council that all of the major players in the industry itself is fairly small. From me being involved in the process, what I can tell you is there's probably anywhere from 15 to 25 companies that really are in play on any of these transactions across the country. We feel as though the RFP process guided by our council was robust, and we feel like we, overturned every stone in the process. And the numbers are the numbers. So that's sort of what, I mean, it was a very objective, market-driven process.
I need to recognize Mr. Neal next.
Thank you, Mr. Kirby. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Hardy, I understand your point. I understand my colleague's point as well. We're in uncharted waters as far as technology is concerned. Why we're doing this, you said, because technology changes. Keeping in mind the 50-year spectrum, one, let me start off with this. If we can look and get an idea on how other cities may have structured their deals, because the 50-year thing is not being familiar with what this is. So much has changed in just 5 years. What would be the potential value of this asset, the airspace and whatnot, that is made available through these towers, you know, even 10 years out from now? So just seeing if there's something that we could even structure in a deal to where if this becomes some exponential, you know, opportunity, you know, it can be relooked at. That's all. I mean, not to take, I know, not to take away from the business's opportunity to maximize what it has the potential to do, but then too not to miss out on an asset whose future potential we don't know.
Councilman, we'll certainly take a look at what other cities try and get those for you.
Okay, thank you. Then my,
Councilman, I just wanted to comment real quick. My understanding, too, is that the 50 years is the industry standard. So I think that EIP would probably get up here and tell you, and I'm sure that we would welcome them at some point if they would like to comment. But also, we could also have you in touch with our counsel as well, and he could guide you on that. I think that would be an objective perspective. And in fact, you know, more city-centric than anything because he is our representative. Okay. So they could guide you on that, but my understanding is 50 years is the flat across the board industry standard in all these transactions.
Oh, I mean, I can understand that to some degree because in the industry, I mean, they have a better understanding of what's available and the potential of that market than we do. I mean, the closest thing that we could probably think of is, you know, water. This is the new water. And if you talk to anybody now, water is the new gold. Water is the new oil. People understand the value of water now and all of its potential, where in the past, you know, when we didn't understand it, oh, just go ahead and dump it in the lake over there. Well, now we know that you don't want to do that. So, I mean, so that would be helpful. The other thing, this is only for the 15 towers. It doesn't restrict us from leasing out any other asset. That's all free. Okay, so that's good to know. Then last, we always ask whenever this comes in, is there any community benefit connected to this as well, to these areas outside of, I mean, I know the city maximizes the revenue that it gets in it, but we've always, whenever we've looked at these things, we've always wondered about the community benefit dollars that come in from this, because the technology is uncharted, and we have some folks that come in and have great concern with these towers whenever a new lease comes up. And
I want to touch on one thing about community benefit, but then pitch it maybe to Diane to talk about really the benefit to the city in this transaction is the improvement of the financial condition, which she can talk more than I can about that. But I think the real arena for, and I think this is good that we're talking about this now before something comes in, but the real arena that mayor and city council need to be ready for is the 5G build out. I know enough about this to be dangerous, so don't take it to the bank, but from the work that we have been doing over the last year, really in response to the state's efforts, and what Ohio is doing is one of only 30 states trying to do the same thing, is sort of restrict our ability to regulate our own right-of-way as this technology, this small cell technology gets built out. Rest assured that Director Belfance, the Law Department, Finance Department, and the Mayor's Office have been on this since the moment it got introduced in the state. We're making actually some good headway on that at the state level, but we're also looking at the local level. What can we be doing now to prepare ourselves so that when that technology comes, then they're not just taking right of way that the public taxpayers built to put up technology. What are we getting in return? We have significant digital divide issues in Akron. We have significant digital inclusion issues in Akron. We want those addressed. And so it's a great opportunity if we can work together with telecommunication partners as opposed to them forcing us into a situation. So on this particular transaction, the benefit, and that's why I say I'm going to pitch it to Diane, is really more from the monetary and fiscal perspective. But I think you're thinking about this correctly on the larger, I don't want to say battle, because I hope it's not a battle, but the larger conversation that's going to be happening over the next 5 years in cities, which is, as 5G gets built out, what's in it for us, and how do our citizens benefit?
So again, the major benefit to the citizens today is we will be doubling our cash reserves without money out of their pockets. The important thing about that is we'll be in a better position to weather the next recession. We do know a recession is coming. We'll be in a better position to weather the recession.
In order, we have Mr. Kilby and then Mr. Fusco and then Tara, please. Mr. Kilby?
Oh, yeah, thank you. Mr. Neal asked most of what I wanted to ask. The 50 years does seem like a long period of time. I don't know much about this industry, but somebody said that this is a standard in this line of whatever. So this company that we got advice from, Varnum LLP, where are they located?
Yeah, the firm itself, it's a law firm. The firm itself is located in Michigan.
Okay.
Our particular counsel, who is the head of their telecommunications group, is John. John is actually physically located in Arizona.
Okay, so so are they setting a standard, or is there other law firms that are competing with them for this? I mean, is there other law firms that specialize in this industry?
You know, Councilman, I'm sure that there are. I don't know off the top of my head who they are, but I do know that the council was selected and after a lot of consideration.
Okay. You know, I guess I guess we're going to have to respect the experts in this because none of us really know much about it. And I understand what Mr. Hardy's talking about. We can't predict the future. We don't know what we don't know. Who knows? I mean, maybe in 20 years, they may not even need cell towers. I don't know. But I tend to think it's probably a good deal for the city. A lot of thought went into it, but I would like to just ask a couple questions about the money that we're going to get from this. So we're going to double our cash reserve, use 5 of the 11 million for that purpose. What's the other 6 million going into the general fund?
It was budgeted to go into the general fund.
Okay.
So again, when we put the 2017 budget together, we were counting on getting at least $6 million. The good news is this transaction is 11 million, so we have an additional 5.
Okay. So I guess for all intent and purposes, this is a one-time thing. I know I'm not going to be around in 50 years, but maybe a couple people here will be. They're lucky. So so it's like a one-time thing, and I guess, you know, I tend to feel like, you know, we're probably going to go along, I will anyways, go along with this. I would like to, when we do the budget, I think there's some things that people on this council would like to look at. We're already talking about the retirees, their spouses, okay, looking at that, seeing if we can help some of those people out. So maybe that $6 million or whatever's left over can be used for that. I don't know, but I think council ought to take a really good look at how this money is spent when we do our budget next year, starting soon.
So I just want to, I think those are all legitimate points to make. I think I would just reiterate what Diane said, and again, really what the mayor's at on this. Cash reserves are just that, they're reserves. So from our vantage point, we're not looking to spend those dollars next year. We will never get to the GFOA recommended amount if we continually spend cash reserves. That's been our challenge, quite frankly, since the Great Recession. So it's really more how can we work with council together on budgets that really get at what is our core essential services, what do we want to invest in as a city, but recognizing that we need to build our ability to weather the next storm and not necessarily spend as soon as it comes in.
Well, I wasn't really referring to the cash reserves, but isn't there going to be another $6 million? No. What is that?
No, sorry, that $6 million is going into the 2017 budget to pay expenses of the 2017.
So are we coming up short right now? And
This was planned at the beginning of the year. We knew we would be receiving additional revenue. So again, that's why I pointed back to that page that was in the initial, I think, budget presentation that we did to council, the general fund revenues page. The only additional column is the projected 2017. The rest of these numbers were included when we first started talking about the 2017 budget.
okay, so when did we first get this bid? When did we get the bid? I have to look at the timetable here.
I think it's August,
Okay,
September.
So you're saying that we were including this money in our budget when we did the 2017?
Yes, we've known that we were going to do this. Our goal was to execute on it in 2017.
So we knew approximately how much money it was going to generate?
We knew we would receive approximately $6 million.
Okay.
At least $6 million.
Again, that was based upon the unsolicited proposals that had come in over the years.
Mr. Fusco?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I concur with my colleague in reference to the diversity piece. And I look forward to a plan, and hopefully you have given some thought to that, to an intentional plan in terms of moving forward. And you need to do that. And so we need to see something, I believe, in writing. Agree with that. My question, though, is and it's kind of exciting to see this, and I applaud the efforts, but in terms of the, is there, I noted that they're going to be actively marketing these 15 locations, correct? Okay, and that's good, because I don't know if we have done that ourselves. But is there then going to be a cap on the income? Because obviously they're going to be able to go out, actively recruit carriers. They're going to then carry, you know, on these, and I don't know if we have the rights to those future leases, or if there's going to be a cap on that or not, or, you know, and perhaps it can be like a cap in terms of income, and then we could. Sure.
So I'll let Brian talk to the specifics of the deal that's been negotiated. I think you're correct, Councilman, that we haven't marketed this. I also would reiterate that it's not necessarily a city's forte to know how to market telecommunication devices. So we have been, you know, poor at that, and I don't see that changing anytime soon. So there's obviously, as Mr. Angeloni noted, there's an industry that's grown up around purchasing these leases, and it's because the telecommunication industry knows best how to market to themselves.
I agree.
And so the other point I'll make is that, and I think Councilwoman Sims brought this up, there's nothing stopping us on other city property from, again, if there are opportunities from a telecommunications perspective on equipment for us to go ahead and do new leases. There's no non-compete or anything of that nature. It's just on these 13 sites with these 15 leases, EIP has exclusivity on how to market that. And certainly, the industry wouldn't have grown up if there wasn't a profit to be made. From the city perspective, that's understood as part of the transaction. We wanted to maximize the value for the citizens, but then also recognizing that we don't do this very well and we never will. And so the best we can hope for is, again, as opportunities come along, as technology changes, if there are good fits to generate new revenue streams for the city, yes, I think we want to be open to that. But we also want to recognize what we're good at and what we're not. But Brian can speak to the specifics around your cap
Good.
question.
And I concur with regards to the marketing piece. I'm glad to see that moving forward, that we're, that they're going to take on not only the marketing piece, but also the risk piece, because as you mentioned, that, this is, in fact, a changing, evolving business. So, yeah, I'd like to hear more about the...
So transactionally, what I can tell you is that there is no cap in terms of how they can market that. Now,
well, not so much how they market it, but in terms of, say, for example, they're able to bring in
That's right. Additional
AT&T, and
that's
then
right.
they're going to get an income stream, and
There-
then would there be a cap
Yes.
on that? We could receive anything over and above.
Right, and monetarily, there is no cap on that. There's no money that the city's going to receive in return for that. What I will tell you is that through the negotiating process, which has been lengthy, and their general counsel, Mr. Lemon, is here as well, EIPs, I can tell you that it's heavily negotiated what the terms and conditions about, especially use of anything that has to do with water towers and things like that. There are protective provisions that we have absolutely, stuck to our guns. We have fought for, and EIP has been very willing to give us those provisions. And I will tell you, they're very protective to the city, and especially to the functionality of all of these sites. So when we're talking about a rooftop or we're talking about a water tower, yes, they could market it, they could get additional revenue that we're not going to get a piece of, but at the same time, it has to be done within reason. It can't in any way endanger the structure, the function. It also can't endanger the ground surrounding it, so that there's 10 million little boxes and we can't get our trucks in there. So there are some protections built into it.
Mm-hmm. Good, thank you.
Ms. Mosley Samples?
Thank you. Councilman Fusco really touched on what my question was. Another one is, I know you talked about all the leases being bundled and sold to EIP. Will EIP honor the terms of the current leases that are there, or do they have the authority to change or amend those leases?
Yeah, when we bundle those leases together and transfer them, they have to step into the city's shoes, essentially. They have to abide by those terms. Now, that's not to say that theoretically, if the two parties that were part of that contract agreed to change it, that they could probably do that too. But I don't know that that would happen. It's probably very unlikely.
Okay, and then my last one was, so if they have new companies that they may lease one of the towers to, AT&T, Sprint, what have you, do they have to come back through council for approval, or this is straight EIP, they don't need us for any of it?
Good question, Councilwoman. There are certain consent provisions built into the agreements, but there is no city council approval of these things. They will be free to negotiate them. In terms of, to Councilman Fusco's point, the protections that we're talking about, the built-in protections, they're very specific things that they need to comply with, and certainly our consent is part of that process. But as far as renegotiating, no, they would not need to come back to council.
Okay, thank you.
What are the terms of the payment that we would receive? Lump sum? I mean, is that what we're hearing? Okay, lump sum, that comes when?
Before December 31st.
Okay, and I will acknowledge in a moment, President Keith. The sites that we have right now, is there anything that we are using those for? And does that, are there any issues for us in that?
Sorry, Mr. Chairman. In terms of our use of the property for telecommunications, these particular sites, no, we're not utilizing them other than equipment that would be sort of tertiary to the function of, for example, a water tower. If there's a SCADA device or something like that, a monitoring system, we have accounted for that in the agreement in those protective provisions that I was talking to you about earlier. But as far as telecommunications, no, I don't believe there's any equipment like that for the city's purposes.
So there's nothing on any of these sites where police or fire or anything like that would be using that would compromise our use?
No, and in fact, there was one site originally contemplated to be in the deal on Blackstone, and we actually pulled that from the RFP before it even started because of the questions about the police and fire and emergency use. But there are provisions, again, built into this that would state, to the extent that the city would require those sites for those purposes, that we'd be able to utilize additional space to the extent it exists.
And we're talking 13 sites. How many sites do we, I assume we're not talking about all of our sites, or is this the whole?
These are, as far as we know, excluding one site that I was just mentioning, Blackstone, these are all of the sites where there are cellular antenna communications equipments for commercial purposes.
Okay.
As for all of the sites around the city, I think we have probably a plethora of them left over. And, you know, to the point that Mr. Hardy was making, I think that there's probably a great opportunity for the city to potentially develop those sites into revenue-generating types of things that we're dealing with here, create another asset pool. So no, I don't believe that this is all of the sites that the city has. I think we have other ample opportunities to develop that in the future.
Yeah. Thank you. Mr. Hardy, I'd agree with you as well. There's some things that we do, and I think some of us sit back and say, why are we doing this? There are so many people that can do this better. And I'm sure there's some other things that maybe we do in the city that in the future we'll be looking at saying, why are we doing this? There's experts out there. We're city government. We're not a leasing company. We're not well, we are a water company, but I concur with what you've said. President Keith, and then I'll come to you, Mr. Swirsky.
Okay, so the questions and answers have been good, because when you sit back, you start to fill in all these missing pieces. And I just want to make sure that I have this correct. This is time sensitive, this piece of legislation, so we're meeting here today to get our questions answered about this piece that's coming before us, which is time sensitive. We haven't done a real good job so far with these 13 sites of maximizing them. And this particular company, after putting out bids, came back. Our original bid was non-solicited, and it was for $6 million. So that was put into the budget, right? Correct?
The one that we have from the 2016 was roughly 4.6, but they've been in the range of 4 to 6 million.
Okay. And then if I look at page, I don't know if these pages are numbered, but if I look at our general fund revenue, we are down in our projections with income tax. So in some other areas, so this would certainly shore up, even though we had it put in there, this is going to shore up where we've become short of our budget. Would that be correct?
This would help, yes.
Okay. And it's in one lump sum, which Councilman Freeman got that for. And I'm going to imagine probably everybody else in this room has already discovered this. But by doing this at this point in time, we are not in another recession. We are not, obviously there's a need, but it's not, we're not in a situation, a traumatic situation that we're reaching out. So right now we are in a very lucrative position to be able to look at everything that's out there without the monkey on our back right now, and to make this choice, which, you know, a week from now, 2 weeks from now, a year from now, 2 years from now, we may not have this opportunity as we see it now. Would that be correct?
Correct.
Okay. Alrighty. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Mr. Swirsky?
Well, I just want to thank you for looking down the road for all of us and anticipating future problems. It's good leadership. I especially liked Mr. Angelini's comments about taking a look at the other cell towers that we have in our city and trying to figure out ways to make those revenue makers for us also. I mean, I guess the thing that comes quickest to mind is the permits. And we could raise the cost of the permits. I know we have a lot more than 13, and a lot of those are on private property, right? But even there, through the permit process, that we approve these sites and we cooperate with them, like to see the public benefit, besides the service, but benefit financially also.
Thank you. Mr. Fusco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just for everyone, whenever we initially had done this back in the day, it was in fact the service director's office that actively went out and solicited, and we discovered an income stream based on the technology of the day. And we were able to get that at the time, so it was very creative at the time to go out and get this income stream and utilize, saying we're the biggest land owners basically in the city of Akron. You know, this is a great way to capitalize on that, and just obviously looking for ways that we can continue that. But I agree with also, and we know what it's like whenever we see these new towers come into our neighborhoods, and so that's, you know, it would be much better if we can kind of control our destiny, but we're limited, understandably, by the feds. So,
Ms. Miller-Dawson, I didn't mean to interrupt, but understanding, okay, the increase in the balance, the reserve balance, when do we go out for another bond rating with Moody's or S&P or whoever?
We were just out, excuse me, I want to say in November.
Okay, and so this will not really affect, or is there a chance to revisit them?
You know what, this is going to help us remain stable. I mean, there's always a concern of a downgrade because of our low cash reserves.
Okay.
This adds stability to our debt rating. I mean, yes, there's a future upside. If we continue on this path, we could potentially see upgrades. But today, what we're doing stabilizes us as a city.
Okay, thank you. All right, Mr. Neal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Don't want to take my colleague's question, so I'll give him credit for it. To Mr. Hardy and to the administration, just to kind of like be forward-thinking, again, thank you for this, but if we get an understanding of what other assets we may have that potentially, and then not just that, and it's making me think of the folks that did the, they used to have the hackathon thing now where, which we call them now has his loft. These were guys that were doing 3D printers and building. Right. I mention that because maybe there's something else out there that we don't know. Like, I'm going to use Bitcoins, but Bitcoins isn't it. But that could be a threat to cities. But maybe there's some other technology out there, or there's some other things that are coming that could be potential revenue sources that, as you said, we don't have anything on the books yet. But as a city, we just need to be looking at, because 50 years, if I go back 50 years ago, and I'm thinking, I don't think these were around 50 years ago. And a lot of things that weren't around, and a lot of things that were around that aren't. Just so that we could be thinking in that kind of way. It makes me think when we, the questions we had about the trees, not understanding how valuable and the money that came in just from foresting some of those trees. So that would help us just, you know, to have an understanding of what potentially could be there and isn't there that one day could be, if that makes sense.
It absolutely does, and in response to that, Councilman, and we couldn't agree more. We took this particular opportunity first because it seemed like the market was ready. We were getting these unsolicited proposals. We, through outside counsel, had it evaluated. It seemed like the thing to take first. But the Blue Ribbon Task Force contemplated other things as well. And you bring up the forestry piece of legislation last week. You know, another opportunity that we have yet to explore, but I think we have an interest in at least figuring out what it would look like, are things like a conservation easement program. We, city mothers and fathers, years and years and decades ago, bought up a considerable amount of land around the watershed. The good news is to your point earlier, we now have an overabundance of surface water, clean surface water. We want to protect that, don't we? There's environmental benefits and fiscal benefits potentially to a conservation easement program, but we have to understand it, much like what law and finance went through very deeply on this one. We would need that kind of time, but the return could be, as we've seen here, substantial for the taxpayers without, again, impacting their daily lives or their pocketbooks. So there are lots of opportunities that we want to look at in partnership, and rest assured that not only on the opportunities that I've just talked about, but again, and everybody's sick of me talking about it internally, but being ready for 5G. I mean, that is coming, and it's a totally different technology and a totally different infrastructure build out than just popping up a pole. we have to be ready for that. We're working on that now. So we will, I think you're right, we need to keep you in the loop as we're working through that. We will, but we are open to other one-time opportunities as well.
Mr. Kilby.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hardy, what other assets is this administration looking at right now? You mentioned the watershed.
Yeah, I don't want to get everybody excited.
Okay.
So I know that that's a very touchy subject, which is why, again, both in the Blue Ribbon Task Force and in our strategy maps, we've always said appropriately and responsibly looking at these things. We recognize history as well as today. We don't want to jump into these things willy-nilly. So really, this has been the only one thus far that we've really delved deeply into. There are other opportunities, but again, we would need to give them the same due diligence that we gave on this one.
Well, you know, Mogador Reservoir is not part of our watershed. It's not. We don't get water from there. It's just
Industrial.
It's never been used for anything except recreational purposes. From what I understand, it was a WPA kind of make-work project back in the 30s. I just think we should seriously look at that, because we don't need it for anything that I know of. I mean, we're even leasing out the recreational stuff to the YMCA now. That seems like a pretty valuable asset. You know, that's something that, I mean, I'm sure someone's thought of it, but, and then, what do we own, 18,000 acres of land in Geauga County, which is our watershed, and we have to protect that, I understand that, but we lease out thousands of acres for agricultural purposes, and, you know, I mean, maybe we should look at selling some of that too, if we can. I mean, I know, let's see, what was his name, the guy that was head of the water and sewer, McCrandall, years ago, he's been retired for years ago. This came up in the 90s, talking about selling assets, and now he said, and Diane, you may know the answer to this, he says, we can't, and he was just I don't know, he wasn't the financial guy, but he said, we can't do that because this is, what is it, collateral for all the debt we have. Now, is that true? I mean, that Mogador would be the collateral that for all the debt we're carrying?
Well, I think we would have to look at each type to see, because some of those are gone.
Yeah, okay. But I just think we should look at that strongly, because we don't need Mogador Reservoir for anything.
I think, again, we have a mission that's been given to us from the mayor that we need to improve our financial condition, and I think these opportunities, as you've seen in this proposal, really can get at that with minimal impact to citizens. And so we're looking at that, but we always do it with the mind of thoughtful, appropriate action. We don't ever want to jump in anything, and I want to rest assure this council and those that are listening, and we'll read this later, that just as we did with this, we would never go down a path of monetizing any asset without first giving it very, very, very thoughtful due diligence. And you have our assurances, as we've done on this, that we will do that.
Okay. We'll allow, Ms. Sims.
Last question. On the 50 years, so I don't know how you really adapt towers. So we won't have any say on how quickly we need to get 5G technology in if EIP is kind of running that. The only question is, I know we talked a little bit about smart cities. We talked a little bit about areas of our cities that are a grave deficit as it relates to technology. I just kind of wonder what our say is. I know our rooftops are still prime property, and they service a large portion of our city. I just want to know what say do we still have to make sure that we get timely, up-to-date kind of technology to serve the residents of the city.
So I'll tell you, Councilwoman, that we are working every single day right now to make sure we have a big say in how that technology, a very big say, a huge say in how that technology is built out. I think it's important to note that, again, we're really, in this transaction, we're only talking about 15 leases on 13 sites, and on those 13 sites, on those 15 leases, EIP has exclusivity. But on city-owned land writ large, other opportunities that may come down the pike, they don't have a say in that. They only have a say in those 15 leases for 50 years. The important thing for us, and this is not just Akron, cities across the country are dealing with this struggle. And I'm sure you've read a lot about the FCC and controversial decisions going on at that level, at the federal level, which definitely have an impact here as we try and address digital divide. Our big issue, cities in America today, is how do we make sure we maintain our say, address the community benefit that Councilman Neal talked about, both fiscal and otherwise. It may not be in the form of money. It may be in the form of, again, making sure that our digital divide is met and that children aren't sitting outside of a McDonald's trying to catch a Wi-Fi on a phone to do their homework. That's not the future we want. And so those are exactly the types of conversations we're preparing for internally, and I think council as our partners need to be prepared for because it's coming. I don't think we're there yet. Unfortunately, on that larger conversation, which again is separate from this transaction, it's all new technology, and so even the telecommunication industries don't yet know exactly how they're going to build it out. So we're trying to make sure that the public's right-of-way is protected from the standpoint of if we're going to be used for an infrastructure build-out, what do we get for it? And those are exactly the types of conversations that we're not only having here in Akron internally, but are happening in American cities across the nation around how are we going to deal with something that clearly everybody wants. We don't want to stand in the way of progress. We know that the next level of technology needs and should be built out. The key philosophical questions are in the how and the who benefit. And rest assured that our law department, probably better than any other law department in the state, at a state level, are engaged in that conversation weekly. We are looking at how we can do some things here locally that we might bring to you in the near future. But writ large, as this conversation plays out on a national scale, we're very much trying to stay up on best practices. But on this particular transaction, no, we don't see any impact on our global conversation that you want to have, and we do as well.
All right, if we have no further conversation, we would like to make, allow us a week, if we could take a look at this, and any questions would be best directed to, okay, Brian. Okay, everyone hear that? Questions to Brian. Ms. Sims?
Mr. Chairman, my question would be, would we have the responses back prior to, well before next week? The inquiry about hiring practices, as well as is there some threshold where we might be able to incorporate in this agreement are some benefits that we might receive that is beyond what we're currently selling the lease. I think that's the question that was asked by both Councilman Fusco as well as Mr. Neal, so that we would have that information back before Monday.
What would be a satisfactory time frame? Wednesday, Thursday?
Yes.
At
yes,
least
sir.
over the weekend, or, okay, we'll say.
Before the weekend.
If we could have a response so we could look at it at least through the weekend. Thursday would be maybe utopia for us if we could get that.
So, yes, but I just want to clarify one point, which is the question that I have written down, and I just don't want anybody to get our expectations crossed, is, really answering the question of is 50 years the industry standard, why, and try and get into that, which I think we can. What I don't want to say that we can do is open up the agreement to particular caps or community benefits that we haven't already negotiated. I mean, as we've talked about before, there is a time sensitivity to this. We can certainly look, and we hear you on that. I'm not sure this particular transaction is where the rubber meets the road on that. But so I just want to be clear, because I don't want anyone to have unrealistic expectations that we can open, that we can do drastic things with the negotiation, but we can certainly answer the global question about why 50 years, why is that the industry standard, et cetera.
So I would think if there's some glaring opportunity as you look at those examples and you see that in there, that there would be an opportunity to to do what is deemed in the industry to be best practice, if that in fact exists there, I would think, without peeling back all the complete onion and saying, let's redo this whole process. But I would hope that there's something that is that's really outstanding that we would consider it.
Sure, and I believe we have. That's why I just want to give folks the impression that, as Mr. Angeloni said, we fought very hard to make sure that we have provisions in there that protect the city. And we will respond on the global questions, but I just want to be certain about expectations that and I said before, I'm very proud of this group, and you should be as well. This was not an easy negotiation and to get to this point, and they served the city very well. And so it's a negotiation and an agreement that we can be proud of, but we can still answer the question again, which is why 50 years? Why is that the industry standard? And again, try and get at some of those, and we can do that within the time frame allotted.
All right.
Motion to adjourn?
We have a motion to adjourn. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Ms. Belfast, do we need to then go back to the meeting of the council, or can we just adjourn from here? Can we just adjourn our general meeting from here, or, okay, we're adjourned. Thank you.